Really excited about this topic and talking about what's happening in the world of product analytics. So want to do some quick intros first, and then we'll dive in, and definitely want people to submit questions throughout and this to be super interactive. So feel free to use a Q&A module there, and we'll pull audience questions throughout the conversation. But to start, my name is Matt Arbesfeld. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at LogRocket. I also run the product team, so work a lot with product analytics and using our own products to measure user experience. Diana, maybe you could introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Diana. I'm head of product and one of the co-founders at Correlated. The way I describe what Correlated does is we basically are a software platform that helps salespeople sell more software. But the way that we do it is through lead discovery, lead scoring, and lead routing. But yeah, I've been a product manager for most of my career now, and obviously work with product analytics a lot. Partho?
Thanks, Diana. Hey, I'm Partho. I'm VP of Product and GM of our self-serve revenue line at Security Scorecard. Security Scorecard's a cybersecurity platform that helps you rate your security rating and cybersecurity posture, so you can easily sign up. We have a pretty cool free product that allows you to basically see the score of your cybersecurity posture really quickly, which is actually pretty useful for product folks, for any product folks out there that might be interested in that side. So yeah, excited for the chat.
Awesome. And I think you win with the coolest shirt of all of us. I just noticed the watermelons.
Nice
Shirt. So, and just quick LogRocket ad. So for those who don't know about LogRocket, we're a product analytics software that combines session replay and error tracking to build better user experiences, and work with both B2B and B2C customers to help improve their online experiences. So probably we'll mention more about LogRocket later, but definitely check us out and try a free trial, or reach out if you're interested. But yeah, without further ado, would love to kick things off, and maybe Diana, if you could start and share how you've been using product analytics in your organization. What do you measure? What are sort of some of the most important metrics that you look for when using product analytics?
Yeah, the way that we think about product analytics, or the way I think about product analytics, is a combination of top-down metrics and bottoms-up metrics. So for top-down metrics, it's like, what's our overall monthly active number of users? We look at monthly active and weekly active, and how many weekly active users we retain over the month. So that's kind of like our top line business metric. And then in terms of kind of more bottoms up metrics, we actually track feature usage for every single feature we ship, so that we know whether or not the amount of time that we're spending on a given feature actually drives measurable usage. So kind of both of those strategies, tops down is more business oriented, and then bottoms up is more feature oriented.
That's great. And Partho, how about for your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think we oftentimes coming in, like, product growth is pretty new to a lot of the organizations I joined, so we get pretty heavy into the product data and analytics side. Often that starts really kind of immature, just looking at drop-offs and really focusing on what are some of the kind of really quick wins that we could have as an organization to improve adoption and engagement of the platform. But usually around the kind of 3 to 6 month mark, we start kind of getting more into things like your setup moment, your aha moment, your habit moment. And that's from the Reforge framework, that those might not know it, and working backwards from there. So understanding quantitatively, what are making up these moments in terms of, long term, what do the stickiest of customers look like in terms of, a cohort matrix, and then working back of like, okay, if certain people get to a certain habit moment, what does that look like for correlation of that long-term retention, and also trial to paid conversion. That's often a big focus. So that seems to have, my time here at Scorecard, but also previously at Hootsuite, that 3 to 6 month mark was kind of when we started diving deeper than just kind of overview of flows and funnels and drop-offs with product analytics.
That makes sense. And maybe it'd be helpful for folks. So do you focus on the activation flows, or sort of what is product growth? What's sort of the scope for you there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it changes company to company, but I think the standards typically that are always pretty well known and set in stone is absolutely we've got product managers on activation, we've got product managers on kind of overall adoption. Some companies will call that engagement or retention. And then we've got product managers on monetization. Those are pretty standard to always be in product growth and under product management. The areas that might not be as one-to-one with every company is acquisition. Acquisition at our company is in product. At Hootsuite, it was in marketing, but having an acquisition PM that's really thinking, top of the funnel and really going into cold signups and how that ties into the product activation. So that's also usually a big part of it, I would say.
Great. Well, I'm glad. I think, Dinah, you can probably speak more to like when you're earlier mid stage and you're kind of optimizing the product overall, and then Partho to kind of that optimization stage. So maybe, Dinah, I'd love to learn how you use product data in that feature lifecycle. So when you launch a new feature, what are you looking at? What do you look at before and after? What's that process look like for launching new features?
Yeah, I'd say, to be honest, early on, we all know like product managers are really strapped for time. So I'd say that I probably only spend around like 20-30% of my time ever really looking at analytics. Kind of early on in that product development cycle, I think the most effective use of product analytics is to identify gaps. So it's like, are there any features that you expected people to use that they aren't using? Or are there features that people are using a lot more than you expected? And so like in our product, we recently just shipped account ownership, and we like account ownership routing, and we didn't really expect anyone to use it, but then everyone started using it. So that's kind of like an area where you can use product analytics to identify, are there areas that I should actually spend more time investing in and building a better product in? So that, I think that's in the beginning of the cycle. And then I kind of mentioned earlier that at the end of the cycle, I always make sure to measure whether or not once you've shipped something, people actually use it, because that way you can learn from the lessons of what were kind of the decision-making points that made you build a feature that no one ultimately used. So kind of across that entire spectrum, in the beginning, you're identifying gaps, and at the end, you're just confirming whether or not, the decisions you made were right.
Yeah, that's the best feeling when you launch a feature and you see that feature usage chart spike. So super satisfying. And then Partho, how about you? Where are you using data in the life cycle of coming up with optimizations and measuring there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar in some cases, especially kind of 0-1 products or 0-1 kind of features, so to speak. Really ensuring there's a focus of adoption. Oftentimes, we're also working backwards a little bit of like, what are things to enhance, core areas that we want people to focus in, and making sure that those two kind of adoption paths are tracking. The latest thing I would say is, in terms of the optimization, is really focused on monetization and making it easy for product managers and growth teams to really drive monetization through upsells and expansion. Like with, net retention rates and net revenue retention being a really important SaaS metric, I think PMs have a large part to play with that metric, but often don't focus on it. I don't know if it's a coined term externally, but we use the term product driven revenue or PDR to really drive like in product expansion. And it's not just the simple thing of like paywalls. It's really ensuring there's an organic behavior that you're seeing adoption grow, and then at some point there's like another light bulb moment to upgrade, and it makes sense to have that kind of a loop happen with your product features. So really optimizing that piece of like adoption to monetization is a really critical thing that we're trying to hone in on, I would say.
That makes sense. And have there been times when product analytics or data has driven those insights, or when do they come from the product data versus more intuition and trial and error, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've tried to remove the trial and error idea for a while, and I think the product tech stack has gotten quite complex because of that. There was a time, like I'll use my previous company as an example. We had, session recording platforms with Full Story. We had, product analytics platforms that then connected to a digital adoption platform. Like we had a tech stack of like 5 or 6 things in total, where it was like, how do we streamline and just use one or two platforms that really drive that behavior? And so, yes, now where we are today, outside of product-led sales, we're really utilizing a model where you can use that usage behavior and usage data to then tag to something like a digital adoption platform that easily creates these experiences, really the right place at the right time to get someone to maybe upsell is really what we're trying to do. And then separately, there's the product-led sales side, which, just TLDR, we're using Correlated. So we're a customer of Diana's product. And, we're really looking to use that to enhance how we go from the product side to more sales touch points and moving upstream through sales.
Makes sense. Diana, how about you? Have there been times when analytics data has changed direction or maybe validated something, or you've sort of spent less time in an area because of the data?
Yeah, I think analytics is always so hard because you can really interpret it in any way that you want. So typically, I think when analytics have actually made an impact on decision making is if we kind of like in our gut already know something and we don't want to just like randomly make a gut decision. So we'll go look at the data to see if it backs us up. So one example I can think of actually of when analytics kind of backed up our decision making is we have in our onboarding flow a question where we ask people what persona they are. And so we collect that information to kind of enrich and augment the product usage data that we have. And what we discovered is that the vast majority of our users in the very beginning were data and ops people. So that was kind of interesting because when we first came out with Correlated, we were trying to build a product that salespeople could go into to build their own playbooks. And we basically discovered no salesperson goes in to build their own playbooks in our product. So kind of beginning of this year, we saw that information and decided we need to actually build something that ops people want to use to scale out kind of their go-to-market motions. And that's how we ended up moving into scoring. So I would say that like scoring, like going into a new product area wasn't necessarily only data-driven, but I don't think we would have done it if we hadn't seen that data back it up.
Right. Yeah, that's big to see. Oh, actually, the users we thought would be using it completely different than the people actually using it, and definitely helps you focus on solving those people's problems. So that's great. And then would love to hear, maybe Partho, it's a start of going from Hootsuite to Security Scorecard. How have you seen the world of analytics evolve? You mentioned kind of simplifying the stack. So how have you seen kind of things change and in the world of product analytics?
I think it's starting to get a lot more evolved and mature. I think the one big thing I've seen in the last 5 years is, product data and just data informed decision making. I say that intentionally, data informed versus data driven has just become more of a requirement from product managers. Like if you don't have this in the toolkit and the skill set to be able to easily, track your own adoption metrics, look at, churn and retention and expansion in your own ways without needing super deep, analysts or data scientists to do that work for you. Like that has to be a part of your repertoire now. And I think these platforms, a lot of product analytics platforms like LogRocket, that's what they need to enable and self-serve. And so more and more product leaders and product managers need to start really understanding how to use this tool, as any salesperson needs to understand how to use Salesforce, or if you're a marketer, you need to use Marketo or Pardot or HubSpot. I think that this is, maybe 5 years ago, that tool that product managers needed to use was something like AHA or Product Board or Jira. I think that we really need to be in place now where some form of a product analytics platform is a part of that play. Yeah. And this actually probably starts more for me like 2015, 2016, when I was at Unbounce, like a landing page builder focused on conversion optimization. They were probably quite advanced at that time. Like that's the place where I really dove into product analytics. We had Heap for a little while. We used our own internal tools, but all of our product managers use Mode, and we kind of learned SQL through using Mode. And we got really data informed. And I think we kicked our competition's butt at that time because we were using those insights, and a lot of folks weren't back then. So that's the biggest thing I think I've seen from a change is really just this has to be a line item on your resume now if you're a PM.
For sure. Product management just keeps getting more and more technical, and that's just one dimension of it. How about you, Diana? Anything you've seen evolve in the last few years in the tooling and product management?
Yeah, I think I've noticed that a lot of products are starting to converge with each other. So, some companies started out with like session recording, some did, a CDP, some did analytics, some did SQL. And now everyone's kind of realizing that spreading everything across so many platforms is really difficult for a product manager because you have to go into like 4 platforms, none of which speak to each other. So I think there's definitely this rise of more of, I don't know, like a vertical full stack product suite. So I think that's really interesting. One thing that I caveat is I feel like people can like die from investing in too many tools. So I like to kind of think about like the use cases I want to cover and which tool I'm going to use to adopt which problem. And, I probably use 3 to 4 tools across the entire spectrum of everything that I do, but I definitely don't buy 2 tools that do the exact same thing or have like overlapping use cases.
Yeah, definitely like using jobs to be done, not just for building the product, but also about the tooling stack. And
Right.
Yeah, something just to plug LogRocket again, something we've sort of worked a lot on is consolidating session replay, analytics, error tracking into one. And so definitely have seen that trend as well here. Awesome. So we've sort of talked a lot about what's great about product analytics, but like we know our job's not just staring at dashboards all day. A lot of it is talking to people and thinking and some gut as well. So I'd be curious, like, what sort of limitations have you seen with analytics? Like, when do you use analytics versus when do you use more qualitative or other sort of ways of making decisions? Maybe Diana, if you want to weigh in there.
I think I often do both actually. So if I write like a product spec or any kind of like, rationale of why we're doing something, I always include customer interviews, experience from the past, like gut hypotheses, and then I include the analytics. I think the thing is a lot of times if you're early on, there isn't a lot of data anyway. I always pull it, but sometimes it's like, oh, one user used this and you really don't learn much from it. But I definitely think it's important just to kind of always do both as like a muscle and like a routine that you exercise.
That makes sense. Yeah, especially for a new product, there won't be any analytics to work from, so difficult to make decisions there. How about you, Partho? When do you use analytics versus other means to make decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, at our current company, especially as we're driving more self-serve behavior and more of let's call it product-led growth motion, majority of our product and deals are still very sales-led, and so I think there's 2 different motions there in terms of how much we have processes in our core product management side that of course looks at retention factors of large clients, of prospective new deals, alongside how many customers are asking for this piece, qualitative feedback coming from customer interviews and feedback from our research team on areas that we could be pursuing. And so that's definitely a big factor from a product management feature or new product area. But then on the product-led growth side, where we're trying to drive, activation rates and engagement rates and things like that, I would say we're using a lot more of the product analytics and data to inform our decisions. It's almost like a 80-20 split rule versus 20-80 on the opposite side, I would say. And I think maybe, my past experiences, I've seen that get to more like a 50-50 rule where you're using both kind of in a balance. And so it's funny, like we brought up like the consolidation of tooling. Like I think there's still a long way to go when it comes to that field for product management. Like if I think about a toolkit for product managers, I don't know that there's one that really exists fully where, how does product analytics and insights get into your roadmap and your road mapping tool? They often don't kind of connect. And so the product manager has to somehow bring that storytelling piece to the roadmap or prioritization conversation instead of it just being there. Same with like, the session recording side, surveys that you might be getting from your digital adoption platform. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely some more consolidation that needs to happen in that space for a real, going down to like one or two tools that really works for product managers, because it's still a little disparate, I would say.
Yep.
So yeah, for sure.
And I think a great distinction between folks who have more of a sales driven motion and a product led, that those are different, and customer success as well. You sort of have to balance all those groups when making your product plans, and some will be more weighed to one-to-one customer or set of customer feedback versus looking at the data. Did want to jump to some questions. I just noticed some great questions. So Diana, here's a question. If a feature isn't being used, how do you figure out whether it's because nobody's interested and you shouldn't spend more time on it, or because it doesn't work well enough and you should give it more focus?
Yeah, I'm so glad someone asked this question, because as I was talking about the process of like shipping and then checking if people used it, there's a lot of nuance, right? Because a lot of times, and this happens to me all the time, you'll ship a feature and literally like it's like a pin drop, like no one uses it, no one knows about it. So I think there are a lot of reasons why something isn't used, and it's not always because that feature was the wrong thing to build. Like there's marketing, there's sales, there's like documentation, all of that. I think the way that I think about it is when you invest in a feature, there's a feature that really aligns with the business goal. So like maybe it's like a new product area, it's a really big feature, like a gap that customers told you about. So if things like that you kind of have already developed a lot of gut sense and intuition around are not actually landing, that's kind of an area where typically what I'll do is I'll write up a couple different hypotheses on why people aren't using it, and then just go in and one by one test every single hypothesis. And if you get to the end, then it probably means that no one wants to use a feature and you misinterpreted the feedback. But if people start using it, that's how you know that there were issues with that feature or how it was shipped, how it was actually built. But if it's like a feature that you kind of did as like a Hail Mary and you were just like curious what would happen, I don't think those features are necessarily worth like chasing down. So I think it's really about like how big is the feature? Does it align with your business? And if it does, I think that's an area where it's worth actually going through that exercise of trying to drive usage before you give up on it.
Yeah, one thing, if I can add one thing to that I've seen a lot is like, I think looking at that feature itself and going back in history, like if you weren't the product manager that drove that feature up and were the original kind of pitch and made the proposal of it, seeing what the original history and context on it is really like super useful. And I think when you go through that, and if you find out that there really wasn't a solid hypothesis or reason behind it, which has happened so many times for myself, of like, we need to go through and sunset a bunch of things because we're having a really hard time letting customers discover our products and features. Well, that's because there's so much clutter in between, even trying to progressively disclose, areas of the product. We have to remove so much. When you go back in history and look at all the reasons, it's like, oh my goodness, there was no reason. Like it was
right. Or like one person asked for it. Yeah.
One thing I would say here too is I think people, like at LogRocket, we started in the session replay space and we went into product analytics. And at the beginning, it was hard to get people to use product analytics because there's just so much to build in the space. And so I think it's important to know what things, there's just a lot of features to get to a place that you're competitive and you're going to have to keep investing there. So that's where I love to have product managers having to sell to customers, see why people say no. Like the product manager being kind of the sales rep for a new product, I think really helps you see, are these gaps that we can fill, or is there a fundamental issue with whatever initiative we've done? But yeah, great question, Laura. Arjun asks, and maybe Partho, you could start the answer here of, how do you think about the line between product analytics and CDP? Do you prefer to have CDP as part of the product analytics platform or as a separate tool? And maybe for the audience who don't know about CDP or customer data platform, that's generally the practice of bringing your data into a data warehouse like BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift, and then building analytics on top of that. So kind of how do you see the line between that sort of analysis and using a product analytics solution?
Yeah, I mean, I can only go from my own experiences, which is, and it's one of those things. I actually haven't had the pleasure of using a CDP in a while. We use Segment at a company that I was at years ago. Since then, most of the companies I've worked at scale, they've removed their CDP to kind of have more control over data and more governance. For example, Hootsuite was a social media management platform, so social data is very, very it has to be of utmost importance, as we couldn't use the CDP. Same thing as security scorecard. We don't use a CDP because it's all in-house. And so it's less about my preference and more about what the needs of our business is and what we're allowed to have there. Obviously, we use we have our data warehouse and a data lake that pipes. I have peers and partners on the data side, and our data teams are always centralized together. And so I often let that be a decision up to that stakeholder, basically. So director of data engineering at my current company, and my last company was VP of data. And they would make that decision in correlation to what our needs were. So I'd be more coming to them of like, I have this issue or I have this problem. I need this product analytics platform, or I need this this feature set. I need to bring Correlated into the product. Then I'm bringing them into the sales calls with me to say, how would we go and integrate this? And we kind of go from there. So I would definitely say, while product management can have an opinion on the matter, I don't know it's their responsibility or accountability to make the decision. It should be also a conversation with your engineering or data partner.
Yeah, and more about what are the needs of the product team, and then if they're fulfilled through the product analytics, that works. Great. And maybe Diana, could you talk about implementing product analytics at a startup that doesn't have any analytics in place? They mentioned their products that they've developed so far are primarily internal facing, so it hasn't been as necessary.
Yeah, I think you should probably start implementing product analytics. And the reason why I say this actually is because I think creating a culture within your engineering team to put in analytics is like a muscle too. So like for us, we use Segment. And every single time we ship a feature, I'll tell people one of the acceptance criteria is that you put in segment tracking. And so now it becomes a muscle where if I forget, some of our engineers actually just put it in because they know I'm going to eventually ask. And one way to really power that kind of culture in your company is to engage the engineers in looking at the results of their work. So we'll like look through, did people use the feature you built? And like if someone built a feature and they didn't put segment tracking, I'll literally call it out. It'd be like, oh, we couldn't check out this feature because there's no segment tracking, and then they'll know to go do it. We also watch like LogRocket session recordings together. So I think that has really just like helped engineers know that the effort they're putting in is actually really important. But yeah, like if you don't have product analytics, I think putting in like something like a CDP is like a really good start, just because those can integrate with a bunch of other product analytics tools. And then you can choose like one or two of these kind of more vertical focused product analytics tools to start with. But I definitely think like Partho was talking a lot about kind of big company challenges. So I think when you adopt anything, you should just know that probably a year or two from now, you'll probably reevaluate that decision, and it's totally okay.
I've got one follow-up on that, if I could. It's probably too hardcore of an answer on this, but it's just such a great question and such a funny thing to read. The stat of 90% of startups fail, it might be even higher than 90%, is true. And I think the reality here for any product manager is like, if you don't have analytics, I would say basically doing the equivalent of taking cash and burning it, because you don't know what's working and what's not working. You may see revenue numbers going up. You may see, maybe you close a single deal, but overall, if people aren't adopting that thing, you don't know that was the actual causation to that factor. And so if our jobs are really to maintain and obviously improve the ROI and investment of R&D and making sure we're always building the right thing, it's really hard to do that if you don't have no base, internal or external. So I think that's like, we started off this whole conversation of like where product analytics has been going. This has to be a mandate. Like it has to be a baseline of some kind, in my opinion. Maybe that's too hardcore.
That's a great point. And I think we went through so many boom years where people would buy products that they don't even know if they were implemented, and they'd renew them. But now every product, people are looking, are we using it? And the source of truth for usage is the product analytics data. So I think it's a great point that you need that if you're selling to customers. Diana, I was going to follow up about how you're using segments, and are you reporting on that in a warehouse, or are you sending that to other analytics tools? Like how are you using those events that you're tracking within Segment?
Yeah. So the way that we use Segment is we obviously just use Segment to like connect A to B. So like we pipe Segment into a product called June. That helps us do a little like some graphs that's like, it's very startup oriented, kind of like very easy to get up and running. But we also do actually pipe it into a warehouse, but I would caveat this and say that I've never done this at any startup until like Series B. But the reason why we do it is our product actually has this functionality where we get things from Segment and put it into a warehouse. So I kind of do both, but I would just say that like as a startup, you probably just use Segment and connect it to like a product analytics tool.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that where you can probably start off using out of the box reporting from an analytics tool, but then as the needs of the data mature and you're working with other teams, you may want that in your warehouse combined with your Salesforce data or other data sources.
Right. And, I think one big mistake I've seen actually product managers make when they adopt a product analytics tool is not to think about how other teams are going to leverage the data. So you definitely want to choose a tool. Like if it's a tool that only you will use, it's fine if it doesn't speak to any other tools. But if you want other people to use the data, you want to kind of like make sure you fill that gap too. Otherwise, it becomes like a silo and no one can touch that data.
Yeah, on that, how do you collaborate with like engineering, UX, marketing on analytics data? What are some of the use cases that cross over with those other teams?
Yeah, I think Partho might have a better answer because I end up doing everything at our company since we're small. So maybe I'll pass it over to Partho.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a really critical part of the role. I think both at the leadership level and exec level, and then making sure that that's a feeling that's felt from top to the bottom, that there's collaboration and just sharing of information through and through. We've opened up access to a product analytics platform to CS, to marketing, to some BDRs, not all sales folks. Not that we're not open to it, but the biggest one that I think is a really big win, because it removes the idea of like whether you're PLG or sales led, is like a lot of companies are now using things like customer success health scores and CS health scores, whether that's the Gainsight or something like that. And that's a really great alignment piece, because that health score should absolutely be based on product usage and product analytics and have a connection. And that way you can bring customer success into the fold, into your product analytics side, and they start diving into that data. So my advice is always just finding a hook with the audience that you're trying to go after and getting them to be involved. On the marketing side, it's, hey, you're bringing all these customers to the acquisition funnel, but the quality maybe isn't the greatest because look at the activation rates. Now you have to come into product analytics to see some of that. So that's the way I've kind of done in the past, and try to get buy-in, people looking at product analytics much more holistically in the company.
Yeah, and would echo the customer success and connecting product usage to the customer success data has been really big in aligning people on that. And then one thing we'd add from LogRocket is connecting the engineering and product teams. And so having product know about bugs or technical issues that are affecting adoption, and also engineering seeing how the problems and errors might be affecting adoption, bringing those teams together has been really beneficial to us as well. Cool. And now would love, like AI is really exciting and everything that's going on there. So I'd love to talk about what you both see in the future of product analytics. Where do you see things going the next 4 to 5 years? Maybe Diana, if you want to start.
We've actually been thinking about this a lot, because we're actually thinking about using AI to process and manage data as well on our end. I think for me, the most interesting areas of AI are not necessarily like all these like natural language chatbots, but more around how AI can take over manual work that humans typically do. So this is stuff like feature engineering, categorizing like text inputs, I could even see, like, for example, one of the biggest problems we see with customers is people will throw event data into a data warehouse and then no one knows what the events mean. So documenting like how those events are tracked, explaining a SQL query that maybe a sales rep doesn't understand. So all of those I think are really interesting use cases for AI in the data space.
How about you, Partho? Anything you see in the future of product analytics?
I mean, I think the biggest thing I'd love to see come from it is just making the job easier and giving more insights. I would say there's still a lot of like querying and like scraping that product managers do today to kind of create reports and things like that. And I think that, obviously AI can be a real assistant to that whole notion of just querying, a question and then a report or a process is built out like that. That seems like a really natural place to go and an exciting one, to be honest with you. So especially as we're seeing a lot of GPT features in other areas, I don't know that that's really infiltrated yet in the product analytics space, but just a simple query of, I want to know how many people or what percentage of people are dropping off, like almost being like a data analyst in your product analytics seems like a really natural place to go. That's just top of mind. Yeah.
Definitely. And to kind of what we talked about earlier, enabling more people and more teams to make use of product analytics data who may not be technical enough to build the queries or understand that data. One area I'm really excited is LogRocket having started in session replay is there's troves and troves of data in those sessions. And so imagine you have an AI watching every single session and feeding you insights, what you could do there. So really excited about what we can do to find, here are 20% of people are struggling with this flow and this is what they're seeing. So features that build on top of the session replay data, really excited for in our space as well. Yeah, I guess a kind of a final question is, how do you see like if there is AI and like product analytics progresses as we see, how do you see product analytics fitting into future workflows? Like, do you expect it to change significantly? Is it kind of what's the world look like in your mind in 5-10 years in terms of product analytics?
Do I go first, Diana?
Sure, I can go first. I think going forward, a lot of the techniques around product analytics are still going to stay pretty similar, like the statistics, running a funnel analysis, all of that. But I think what's going to change a lot is I feel like the speed at which you're going to be able to do an analysis is going to go down to like 0 minutes, because I think one of the biggest innovations I've seen, at least from the product analytics space right now, is just being able to generate the funnel report a lot faster than in the past. Like I remember when I started out as a product manager, I was building the funnel reports myself and like Googling how do you build a funnel report in SQL. And now all of these reports are just coming in automatically and just built within the UI. So I think over time, the product analytics techniques will still largely be similar, but I think, as a PM, you might actually not have to be as technical anymore to really dig into the data and understand, the things that you want to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with that. Not to just like say that out loud, but it's like that is kind of where I think it needs to go. Is really just being more self-serving, right? Like that's the biggest piece. Is so many. Well, I think one of the big buying points of a product on this platform originally was that you didn't need to have a data analyst or a data scientist spent on just focusing on, let's call it, simpler tasks or simpler queries that should be able to be self-servable. And I don't know from a product management side, from what I have seen across, let's call it 40, 50 product managers that I've worked with in the past few years, that is true. Like there's still a lot of coaching, there's still a lot of training, and there's eventually end up just asking an analyst who does the work in the product analytics tool instead of, in a spreadsheet that goes into some Tableau report. So that dream hasn't really come true yet. So I think if a product manager can fully self-serve themselves, and whether or not AI is going to help them in that process, that's a really important factor. Yep. And I hope that's where the world goes, because it'd be really cool to be able to just change that workflow of how you do discovery and product discovery. I think, the further dream would be like how it influences the roadmap automatically, how it spits out ROI calculations automatically, and maybe even how it helps make discovery decisions of like, templates, and here are some improvements in the product that you could be making, and maybe it changes that. Maybe that's way in the future, but that would be, what I figured the timeline, 4 to 6 years. I don't, that could be possible, right? That could be cool.
Yeah, at some point the app just auto changes to do everything by itself, and then we're rendered useless. But I think that's maybe a longer time frame. But yeah, I think to use Diana's your analogy about the funnel, where in the past it was very cumbersome and now it's simpler to do in the product, I'm hoping for a future where the product already detects the funnel and it just shows you, hey, here's a new funnel that's important to track and matters to you. So helping, to your point, streamline all the workflows definitely seems like a future that could be here. Awesome. Well, this was a super great conversation. Any final questions from the audience? I see one from Sarah. I think, Diana, this was to you. What tool do you connect Segment with?
Oh, it's called June. It's the month June, but it's definitely like 0 to 1 is how I would describe that product. But yeah, definitely, if you're looking for something that's simple analytics, that's a good option.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Diana, Partho. Really enjoyed the conversation. And another plug for LogRocket, if you're looking to get started with session replay, product analytics, error tracking, definitely reach out to me, matt@logrocket.com, or come to our website to learn more. But thanks so much for the conversation today. And hope everyone has a great end of summer and Labor Day. Take care all.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.